When you're entangled with a narcissist, the most dangerous weapon they use isn't overt aggression, it's psychological dependency. They condition you to react, to defend yourself, to explain, to justify, and every time you do, they tighten their grip just a little more. This is not a mistake. It's a design. They don't want resolution, they want control. They feed on your energy the same way a parasite feeds on a host, subtly, gradually, until you forget what it felt like to be free. Now, most people misunderstand silence. They see it as passive, but it's not. In this context, silence is not absence, it's resistance. It's an act of psychological defiance. When you stop speaking to the narcissist, when you stop explaining yourself, when you stop reacting, you cut the oxygen to their emotional fire. And that's where the real transformation begins. You see, narcissists rely on emotional chaos. That's their playing field. They provoke you not to resolve conflict, but to fuel it, because your emotional reaction is a confirmation of their power. They know exactly which buttons to press to get a rise out of you, and every time you take the bait, they gain ground. But when you refuse to engage, when you become emotionally non-reactive, they lose that grip. And not just temporarily, it destabilizes their entire framework. There's something deeply philosophical about this. Think about it. The narcissist builds a false identity, an image of superiority, of invincibility, of being the hero or the victim depending on the moment. But it's a fragile construct, held together by the reactions of others. Remove those reactions and the structure begins to collapse. The silence doesn't just frustrate them, it confronts them with a void they cannot fill. And that void is terrifying, because inside it lies the truth. They are not who they pretend to be. Silence creates a mirror, a painful one. It reflects back everything they've been trying to avoid. Their own guilt, their shame, their fear of insignificance. But here's the key: it has to be real silence, not a tactic, not a game. It has to come from a place of authentic detachment. When you truly no longer need their validation, when your silence is rooted in your own healing rather than in revenge, it becomes something powerful. It becomes a boundary, not a punishment. And paradoxically, that's what haunts them most. Not that you hate them, but that you no longer care. This is where many people struggle. They want justice. They want the narcissist to feel what they felt. But here's the reality. The absence of your energy is the justice. Because narcissists don't reflect when you attack. They reflect when they lose control. And nothing communicates loss of control more clearly than your refusal to engage. Now, some will say, but they won't feel guilt. Narcissists are incapable of guilt. That's not entirely true. They are capable of guilt. It's just buried beneath layers of ego defense. The moment they're alone, when no one is left to blame, when the chaos they created finally isolates them, that's when the guilt surfaces, quietly, in the dark, when there's no one left to perform for. And your silence plays a critical role in accelerating that process. This doesn't mean you should sit back and wait for them to feel guilty. That's not your job. Your job is to reclaim your inner peace, to disconnect not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. Because once you do that, something extraordinary happens. You no longer need their guilt to validate your pain. You begin to validate yourself, and that's the very thing they fear most. Someone they can no longer control, no longer deceive, no longer manipulate. Psychologically speaking, silence is a form of individuation. It's the moment when you reclaim your own identity, separate from the narcissist's narrative. It's when you stop being a character in their story, and start writing your own. And that shift is irreversible. Once you taste the freedom of not reacting, of not participating in the chaos, you'll never want to go back. This kind of silence takes strength. It's not easy to stay quiet when every part of you wants to scream, to defend, to be heard. But that strength is what begins the healing, not just for you, but ironically, possibly even for them. Because guilt, real guilt, only enters a narcissist's life when they've lost the people who once enabled them. And when it arrives, it doesn't knock, it crashes. So remember, when you walk away in silence, you're not disappearing, you're transforming. And sometimes the loudest wake-up call isn't the one they hear asterisk, it's the one they feel in your absence. Asterisk, let that be the echo they can't forget. Leaving a narcissist is often misunderstood. People imagine it as a dramatic confrontation or a victorious declaration of independence, some climactic moment where truth is spoken, and the narcissist finally sees what they've done. But that rarely happens. The real impact, the one that cuts deepest, isn't found in confrontation. It's found in quiet dignity, in walking away without trying to be understood, in choosing peace over performance. You see, narcissists thrive in the theater of emotion. They want a scene. They want you to plead or rage or break down, because in those moments they remain the center of gravity. If you're still crying, they're still powerful. If you're still trying to prove your worth, they still matter. That's the trap, and many people stay in that loop for years. Not because they don't want to leave, but because they want closure. They want the narcissist to acknowledge the damage, to say, yes, I hurt you, I see it. But that kind of admission requires self-reflection, and self-reflection is precisely what the narcissist avoids at all costs. So instead, you walk away with your dignity intact, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. You stop trying to extract empathy from someone incapable of giving it. You stop making your healing conditional on their remorse, and when you do that, something powerful happens. The narcissist is left with an image they didn't expect. You composed, not begging, not angry, just done. There's a psychological weight to that image. It's not loud, but it's enduring, it lingers, because narcissists are used to chaos. They're not used to peace. They're used to arguments, tears, guilt trips, emotional explosions. They've rehearsed for those, but what they haven't rehearsed for is your calm departure. They don't know what to do with your silence, and they certainly don't know how to process your dignity. That's not part of their script. And let's be clear, dignity doesn't mean pride. It's not arrogance. It's not coldness. It's rooted in a profound realization that your worth is not up for debate, that you are not defined by their perception of you, and more importantly, that you are no longer willing to perform for someone else's emotional agenda. That realization, once it takes root, reshapes everything. Philosophically speaking, dignity is about alignment. It's about choosing to live in accordance with what you know to be true, even when no one else validates it. It's about walking away not to punish them, but to protect yourself. And paradoxically, that's what disturbs the narcissist most. Not your hatred, not your anger, but your indifference, because indifference is proof that you've moved beyond their reach. And for someone whose identity depends on being in control, that's a devastating loss. You may not see the effect right away. Narcissists are masters of pretending they don't care. They'll act unbothered, unshaken, as if you were disposable all along. But behind that mask is confusion, real confusion. Because they expected a reaction, they expected a fight. And when that fight never comes, they're forced to sit alone with the one thing they've spent their life running from, their own reflection. That's where the guilt begins to creep in. Not guilt in the way healthy people feel it, not remorse that leads to growth, but a haunting awareness that something valuable slipped away, and more importantly, that they caused it. This guilt doesn't arrive with humility, it arrives with fear. Fear that they're unlovable, fear that they're losing their grip, fear that they've been exposed. You can't control whether or not they feel that, but you can control whether or not you continue to participate in their dysfunction. And that's what walking away with dignity really means. It means refusing to let someone else's inability to love become your reason to stay broken. It means choosing yourself, not as an act of selfishness, but as an act of survival. This is not about revenge. It's not about haunting them with some strategic move. It's about understanding that sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is your absence. The narcissist may not ever say, "You were right." They may never say, "I'm sorry." But they will remember the moment you stopped playing the game, and whether they admit it or not, that memory will stay with them. Because you took away the one thing they truly depended on, your willingness to revolve around them. In the end, it's not the dramatic exit that haunts a narcissist. It's the quiet, grounded walk toward freedom, without a glance back, because that silence is filled with something they can't imitate, manipulate, or replace. Asterisk, and that silence, that final act of dignity, echoes longer than any scream ever could. Asterisk, one of the most difficult things about dealing with a narcissist is realizing that the relationship you're in isn't based on reality. It's built on illusion. It's carefully constructed, piece by piece, to benefit them. You were never meant to be an equal participant. You were meant to be a reflection, a mirror, and as long as you reflected back what they needed to see, adoration, submission, sympathy, they were content. But the moment you stopped doing that, the moment you started showing up as your real self, the illusion began to crack, and that's where the truth starts to surface. Narcissists don't live in reality. That's not a judgment, it's a psychological observation. They construct a false self, a persona built to compensate for deep-seated shame, inadequacy, or fear, and in that construction, they assign roles to the people around them. You become the caregiver, the admirer, the scapegoat, whatever suits the narrative. The problem is, the narrative isn't grounded in truth. It's built to protect them from confronting who they actually are. So when you start breaking free from the role, when you stop playing your part, it doesn't just disrupt the relationship, it threatens their entire identity. Now, here's where it gets uncomfortable. The illusion can't survive without your participation. That's the secret most people miss. You don't have to confront the narcissist to expose them. You don't need a dramatic revelation or a grand accusation. All you have to do is stop playing along. When you disengage from the fantasy, when you stop responding to the manipulations, when you no longer react to their provocations, you force them into contact with something they've spent their whole life avoiding, unfiltered reality. And reality is ruthless. It doesn't bend to ego. It doesn't care about self-image. It reflects things exactly as they are. That's why narcissists spend so much time avoiding it. They surround themselves with enablers, echo chambers, people who will uphold the illusion because it's easier than dealing with the truth. But when someone close to them refuses to play that game, when you start to act from your own center rather than their script, you become a threat, not because you're aggressive, but because you're real. That's the power of stepping out of the performance. You let reality be the mirror, and reality, unlike you, doesn't get tired, doesn't flinch, and doesn't negotiate. It simply stands there, quietly dismantling the illusion piece by piece. You don't need to shout. You don't need to expose them on social media. You don't need to rally others to your side. You just need to live in the truth. When you do that, everything false begins to fall apart on its own. There's a kind of philosophical clarity in this. When you stop cooperating with lies, you're not just protecting your sanity, you're reclaiming your dignity, you're stepping out of a distorted system and choosing to live in alignment with what is real. And that in itself is a form of healing, because truth, painful as it can be, is always the foundation of freedom. Of course, the narcissist will try to pull you back in. They'll escalate, provoke, play victim, or suddenly become the person you always hoped they were. But that's not growth, it's strategy. It's the mask slipping into a different form, and if you're not grounded in reality, you'll get pulled right back into the story. That's why it's essential to remember this. The goal isn't to change them. It's to change your response, to step outside of their illusion and stay there. This requires discipline, emotional detachment, a willingness to tolerate the discomfort of being misunderstood, even vilified. Because when you stop playing along, they'll rewrite the story to make you the villain. That's inevitable. But your silence, your refusal to participate, your decision to live in truth, those things will echo long after the drama ends. They will haunt the narcissist not because you destroyed their life, but because you exposed it, simply by refusing to pretend anymore, and that's what makes it so powerful. The illusion doesn't die in conflict. It dies in stillness. It dies when you stop reacting. It dies when you start building a life based not on survival, but on authenticity. And in that life, there's no room for false narratives, only truth, only clarity, only peace. You don't destroy the narcissist by becoming like them. You do it by becoming fully yourself. Asterisk, asterisk, and once the illusion breaks, it can never hold power over you again. Asterisk, asterisk, you cannot make a narcissist feel guilt by attacking them. That's one of the most frustrating truths you'll face when disentangling yourself from a narcissistic relationship. Because when someone has wronged you, deeply, consistently, and often maliciously, your natural instinct is to confront them, to expose them, to show them what they've done. But narcissists are not wired for introspection through confrontation. They are wired for defense, distortion, and deflection. The moment they feel accused, they do not examine their actions. They double down on the fantasy that asterisk you asterisk are the problem. So, how do you reach them? The paradox is this. The most powerful way to haunt a narcissist with guilt is by living well without them. It's not through words, it's not through proof, it's through transformation. Your growth, your peace, your silence, it all becomes undeniable evidence that contradicts the narrative they built, because narcissists rely on your brokenness to maintain their superiority. If you rise, they fall. Not by your hand, but by the simple, brutal truth of comparison. This is not a petty game of revenge. It's a psychological and existential shift. When you begin to heal, to thrive, to find peace in places they said you never would, you force them to confront the possibility that you were never the problem. That's destabilizing, because it's not just about losing control over you. It's about the collapse of their internal mythology. They told themselves a story in which they were the hero, the savior, the misunderstood genius, or alternatively, the eternal victim. And in that story, asterisk you asterisk were weak or broken or dependent. But when that story no longer matches the reality they see, you alive and independent, it creates a dissonance they can't easily resolve. Understand, narcissists are image-driven. Everything is about perception. How others see them, how they see themselves. They avoid truth not because they don't know it on some level, but because it threatens the carefully constructed mask they've spent their whole lives building. So when you walk away and become stronger without them, you don't just walk away from asterisk, them asterisk, you walk away from the illusion. And that collapse, that unmasking, is where guilt begins to emerge. But again, it doesn't look like guilt in the way healthy people experience it. They may never say, "I'm sorry." They may never admit fault. But you'll see it in subtle ways, in the reach shouts, the guilt-laced messages disguised as concern, the sudden nostalgia, the veiled criticisms of your new life. These are not just attempts to pull you back. They are signs of discomfort, of internal conflict. Deep down, they sense something's been lost, not just your presence, but the validation they used to extract from it. And this is where you must stay vigilant, because if you confuse their discomfort with growth, you'll be tempted to re-engage. And once you do, they will restore the illusion and erase the guilt. You'll find yourself right back in the performance, playing your old part in their fantasy. That's why your healing must not be for asterisk them asterisk. It must be for asterisk you asterisk, because real growth is not about being seen. It's about seeing clearly, about recognizing who you were becoming under their influence and deciding to become someone else entirely. There's a kind of moral weight to this process. You're not just leaving a person, you're leaving a system of thought, a system that told you love was conditional, that self-worth was earned through sacrifice, that silence was weakness and boundaries were betrayal. Escaping that system requires more than distance. It requires a redefinition of self, and that redefinition is what ultimately shakes the narcissist most. Because the version of you they controlled no longer exists. Think of it this way: when you become someone they can no longer manipulate, you become a mirror they can't look into, not because you're punishing them, but because your presence now reflects their absence of empathy, of responsibility, of growth. And for someone who has built their identity on superiority and control, that reflection is unbearable. So, don't waste your energy trying to make them feel guilt. Guilt isn't something you can install in another person like software. It's something that emerges only in the vacuum left behind when their manipulation no longer works. Your silence, your boundaries, your healing, that is the vacuum. That is the space where reality begins to speak, and where guilt, if it's ever going to surface, will finally find room to breathe. You don't have to fight them anymore. You don't even have to explain. Just live in such a way that the contrast between your truth and their illusion becomes impossible to ignore. Asterisk, asterisk, let your life become the evidence they can never erase. Asterisk, asterisk.